All right. Hey, Mark, welcome to the stream. Excited to have you on.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Steve. I'm
Of
happy to be
course,
here.
of course, my pleasure. So, for those of you who haven't met Mark yet, Mark is one of our coaches at LSAT Unplugged. Welcome, Mark. You've been working with a ton of students for feels like forever now. I would love to have you share a little bit about your own personal LSAT journey and then a bit about how that might inform your work with students in the program today. So, tell us a bit about your background and how you came to the LSAT and teaching it.
Yeah, for sure. So I think a big part for me was I was never that good at the LSAT. So my diagnostic score was actually 142, and it took me a long time to study for it. I actually made a lot of mistakes, and I went through a lot of the traditional books and resources that people recommend. And month after month, my score just wouldn't increase. And it got to a point where I thought law school might not be something for me. And so flash forward around a year and a half later, and I kept on studying. I eventually broke through and got that 170 plus score, and I was able to ultimately attend um, my dream law school back here in Vancouver. So very happy with everything that I've learned from the LSAT. And I think one of the biggest things I took away from this journey is that the LSAT is really a skill that you have to learn and practice rather than, let's say, a medical science test where you have to just memorize and memorize a lot of content. So I think ultimately the skills I've learned from the LSAT I've been able to apply pretty much anywhere, whether it's inside or outside the LSAT. I think it's a great skill to have, and I'm so happy to be able to pass on this knowledge on to other people so that they can go to the law school of their dreams.
Exactly. That resonates a lot with my personal journey as well. That we started off a lot lower than we were expecting. And unlike a medical school exam like the MCAT or the boards like the USMLE, there's nothing to memorize here, right? I think what you said about it being a skill that you practice
Hmm.
really does resonate. And like so many other things where you might not be a natural genius or savant at it, like it's really just, like Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours rule. Like you just got to put in the reps, get the exposure, and you'd be amazed at how much you can improve over time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, how does that inform your work with students today? I mean, say you come across a student who has a really low starting cold diagnostic, right? I mean, what do you tell them?
Yeah, so first of all, from a psychological standpoint, I would reassure them that their diagnostic doesn't necessarily define them, right? So I like to give the analogy that studying for the LSAT is a lot like working out, right? So there's people that can, maybe there's people with really great genetics and they're just born with huge muscles and they can just do a bunch of push-ups. And maybe I can't do that. But if you train and you're consistent with it, what I personally recommend to students to start is to always go for a low volume approach, right? So I'd rather students go for a low volume approach where they're consistently doing 30 minutes to an hour a day over maybe just studying once a weekend for 8 hours a day. I always think that volume and consistency is going to beat that any day of the week. So that's what I usually tell my students first. And to get them to really prioritize the quality of their studying and the quality of their reading over just doing a bunch of practice tests and practice questions, given how limited the LSAT questions are.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we want consistency that's sustainable, right? You don't
Hmm.
want to burn out. And I think the analogy to working out is also really key. I actually got really into CrossFit several years ago.
Oh, great.
I'm not like a naturally like I was never like a star athlete or anything like that in any context, and I'm a nerd, obviously, right? This is what I do, but I was amazed at how much more fit I could get just through consistency over time.
Hmm.
Just if you set up a schedule for yourself, or even just 30, 60 minutes a day where you really focus on something at the exclusion of everything else, that scales up really nicely.
Absolutely.
And there are
Absolutely.
some students who will burn out and they put in maybe, have you ever come across students who like will try to put in 8 hours a day or do practice tests on consecutive days?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I've come across a few students who are studying for the LSAT full time. So they might not be in school or they might not have a full-time job right now. So it's natural for them to want to spend as much time as possible on the LSAT, which I do commend. And a lot of them have a lot of energy and they say, I can study for 8 hours a day and I feel fine. I feel great. I'm gonna do another practice test tomorrow. And for some of them, it does work, but I do find that for students that are nearing the mid 160s, low 160s, that type of confidence starts to dwindle when they don't realize that they're over fatiguing themselves and developing these little habits that slowly build up. And so what ends up happening is either a plateau or they actually end up dipping down a little bit, which does upset them a bit. So I think one of the biggest things that I usually tell them is that there's usually a sweet spot, right, when it comes to studying for the LSAT. For me personally, I found that my sweet spot was around 4 to 5 hours. I think anything after the 4 or 5-hour mark, my energy starts to kinda dwindle. But I think I always try to encourage students to figure out what that sweet spot is for them, just because every student is different.
Yeah, I think you're right. We got to look at the point where it becomes counterproductive, where you
Mhm.
start getting frustrated because you're getting questions wrong just because you're tired. It's not because
Exactly.
you know it. If you were to come to that same question tomorrow when you were fresh, you would crush it. But then you start to
Exactly.
hate this because you're so tired, and what you really need is a nap, or you need a break to go see a friend for a little bit and just kind of veg out a little bit, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we actually build personalized study plans for our students to avoid this exact issue, right? So we're building in days off into the plan. We're building in maybe 1 or 2 exams a week at most. And if a student has extra time, that means they're going to do fewer exams because they each exam takes a lot longer.
Mhm. Exactly.
Now
Exactly.
we've got a lot of test dates coming up. We've got October in about 2 weeks or so. We've got November in about a month and a half. What would be your advice for students who are stressing out? What are you telling your students who are taking it in October or November and worried that it's around the corner?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess once again, from a more macroscopic perspective, I think that something I always try to tell my students is that the actual test is actually in theory, it's supposed to be the easiest part of the entire journey, right? The same way that for a bodybuilder, the way that they get up on the stage and start posing, that's actually the easiest part, right? Like the hard part was the training that led up to the day where they go on stage and start posing. And so I think that at the end of the day, that the real administration, it's just an assessment, right? At that point of time, how competent are you at recognizing assumptions, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that for students who are stressed, I would just tell them that there's really not much you can do now, right? There really isn't that you can just miraculously shoot your score up by 10 to 15 points. So it's really important to stay faithful to your what you have studied, your practice test results, the habits you've engaged in when you were taking the practice test in timed test conditions. I think those are the most important habits that they should remember bringing into the test, which means that if a hiccup occurs, let's just say you didn't expect question 6 to be so hard, but suddenly the test throws a curveball at you, right? Well, these are situations in which the student has likely been in already through time section practice, through PT practice. And so for my students, I always tell them that from a psychological perspective, it's important for them to learn when to take a breath, pause, and move on when needed, right? And this includes going from question to question, as well as going from section to section. And so now with the online administration, there's that one minute timer that students get between sections. That 1 minute timer, if students aren't already using that already, they should definitely use it just to take a few breaths, meditate, and even just kind of forget that the last section even happened. Because the worst thing you want is the anxieties and worries to snowball as you go through the sections.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, you want that reset. You want to let go of what came before. Because if there was a tough reading comp passage or a particular logical reasoning question, you can start spiraling and think,
Mhm.
oh no, my score is tanked. I can't possibly get my goal score now that this happened. But you might have gotten it right for all you know. Or maybe it was the unscored experimental section, in which case doesn't even matter. But
Exactly.
you can't control what happened. That section is over. That
Mhm.
1 minute is a reset opportunity, like you said. And I'm always talking about mindfulness meditation, right? Just to focus on your breath, let go, move on. By the way,
Mhm.
what's your take on like the flagging function, like flagging and skipping questions? What do you typically recommend around that?
So I personally think that flagging is a great tool. I personally ask students to try to flag questions as they go when they're doing practice tests or time sections, just because I think when it comes to the actual administration, having that confidence is really key. And when you're actually using the flag function, you're able to at least psychologically be able to tell what questions are tripping me up, what questions are not tripping me up, and what questions am I 100% confident I'm going to get right. And it seems so tedious and it sounds like such a small function, but I think there's such great value that can be applied during the practice test or the actual test, because then you can kind of hedge your bets, right? So if you're someone who's trying to score a 165, then you can approximately get maybe 9 to 13 questions wrong around. And so that kind of translates to around maybe a -3 to -5 per section, depending on the curve of the test. Which means that if you're allowed to essentially flag 3 to 5 questions per section, right? So this principle of getting the low-hanging fruit and also identifying the high-hanging fruit is very, very important when it comes to the flagging function. So I would for students that are not doing it already, I would encourage them to do it in their practice so they can properly identify questions that maybe they shouldn't spend too much time on during the test.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is that every question's worth the same, but I think a lot of pre-laws or type A personalities, gunners want to get every single question right. But because they're
Mhm.
all worth the same, there's no reason to get bogged down or stuck on any one particular question, especially if it can come at the expense of something later. I mean, I personally would flag 3 or 4 LR questions, for example, just because I don't want to get bogged down or stuck.
Mhm.
I know that I'm going to start getting stuck in that quicksand and spiraling because it's looking like a foreign language to me.
Oh, for sure,
Yeah.
for sure. And I think if you flag it, then at least if you have extra time, you come back, you can get that fresh perspective
Mhm.
on those questions that you didn't get the first time around.
Exactly right. What's one of the biggest mistakes that you see students make again and again, especially in these final weeks before the test? This is something
Mhm.
that we haven't touched on around that.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the biggest mistakes I see students making up to test day are 2 things. So I think number 1, they start ramping up the volume a lot, but before test day. And it's the same principle as going on a marathon, right? You wanna actually taper the exercise volume before you go for that big run. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is also just trying to cram as much studying as possible before test day, and that actually increases their anxiety a lot. And as a result, they start to not use things like the Socratic review method, where it's important for them to actually slow down when they're reviewing and take a look really precisely at why did I choose this answer? Why did I not choose this answer? And I think for students that are really close to their dream score in their practice test, they get really excited and they start to kind of forget about the Socratic review method and their wrong answer journals and these really unique tools that were able to propel them to that practice test score in the first place.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that review is so underutilized because it doesn't give you the quick dopamine hit of getting another result and evaluating yourself, right? Another practice test
Mhm.
gives you another data point to say where you're at. Drilling another question gives you another right or wrong via instant feedback. But on test day, you're going to sit down for 2.5 hours or longer, maybe, and then you have to wait 2 to 3 weeks to get your score back with zero feedback.
Mhm.
But burning through all these exams, unless you learn from your mistakes, you may just end up making the same ones again.
Exactly, exactly. So I can't overstress the importance of review for sure.
Yeah, I think you've got to balance your practice tests with the review immediately afterwards, right? Like it's a feedback function that you don't take a second exam until you've reviewed the first adequately.
Exactly,
And so, talk
exactly.
about how you work with students in our program when they take these tests. What do those sessions look like where you're reviewing things with them?
Yeah, for sure. So usually for students, I try to get them to fill out their wrong answer journal whenever they're doing time sections or practice tests. And for the one-on-one sessions I do with my students, I typically ask them to bring the questions during their wrong answer journal review that they thought were either scenario one, which is it's way too hard, not something that they can actually understand, and there's this conceptual gap. Those would be really good, questions to bring to me because we've already eliminated the confounding factor of time, right? So we know that time is not an issue, it's a conceptual issue, and therefore we're able to work on it during our session. The second type of questions that I ask my students to bring forward to me is maybe a question that they did crack open in the review and they figured out why it's right. But realistically, they just can't seem to understand how they would be able to get that answer during a timed take, where time is the issue. And so when students bring those questions to me, I'm able to give them those little tips and tricks and mechanics that are able to get them to the right answer choice. So those are primarily the two ways in which our sessions go. And one of the biggest things I like to reiterate with our students is that even if you get the question right, there's bound to be at least one, two, three plus things that you're leaving on the table that you haven't considered yet. And I like to call them breadcrumbs a lot because even for me, as someone who's taught the LSAT for a while now with LSAT Unplugged, every time I look at a question, I still find more and more things that I didn't pick up the last time. And I think the more of these breadcrumbs that you pick up and fill out in your wrong answer journal, the more prepared you are to actually figure out what the flaw or assumption is when you're doing the actual practice test.
That's exactly right. I mean, when you're studying on your own, you don't know what you don't know. And
Mhm.
these questions are so complex. I mean, you're right. I've taught the same questions dozens of times, and I still see tiny little additional nuances with even a 30th look at the same question. And
Mhm.
that was most obviously apparent in logic games, which of course sadly are no longer here, but it's still
Mhm.
in there in reading comprehension. It's still in there in logical reasoning. I have so much respect for the people who craft these exam questions,
Oh,
both in
for
terms
sure.
of the arguments or the passages, but also what makes a wrong answer choice tempting and what makes
Mhm.
the right answer unappealing. And until you know which exact tricks and traps you're most prone to falling for, you may end up making the same mistake again. And students don't always know why they're drawn to a tempting wrong answer. That's something that we can show them.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So I think even for students that, I like to tell them it doesn't actually matter whether you get it wrong or right. It matters in terms of the reasoning process in which you
Mhm.
get to the wrong or right answer choice. That's the most important because the reasoning process you can replicate, right? But
Right.
just choosing the right answer choice, that's something that you might be able to do now, but come question 25, you might not be able to replicate that.
Yeah, you might have just gotten lucky for all we know, and
Mhm.
you might not get lucky again. And even if you got it right, like even if you got it wrong, who knows what led you in that path in the first place, right? We need to know the process because that's what's replicable.
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah, well said. And we've got some comments and questions here in the chat I thought we might be able to address. We got a question here from Will asking, during the exam, after my first reading comp section, my anxiety went through the roof. That minute between sections should be extended to 5 minutes. So I think what will I think the question within here is like Will probably doesn't love reading comp very much given the anxiety that he's experiencing.
Mhm.
What might be a way that we could guide Will to reduce his anxiety when he's going through reading comp? Is there
Yeah.
something that your students experience with reading comp in particular that we could do to help him with his approach, let's say?
There's a few things I would say. So going back to that 1 minute break that you get between sections, I think it's important to really utilize and maximize it. So a few weeks before my actual LSAT administration, I started practicing square breathing a lot, where I would just close my eyes and try to really control my breathing and learning to let my thoughts go. And that was something that I really tried to apply when I eventually took the real LSAT. So that would be my first recommendation. I think the second recommendation when it comes to RC specifically is to understand where the anxiety is actually coming from. And I'm willing to say that for a lot of LSAT students, the anxiety comes from opening the section, and the first second you just get this big brick of text that's waiting for you, and you don't even enjoy or are interested in the topic. So one thing that I actually started to do, and something that I recommend my students do, is to engage in this habit of either reading newspapers, articles, or like Wikipedia entries for like 3 to 5 minutes a day. It doesn't even need to be long, but just getting used to the feeling of clicking on a link, having this random text pop up, and having to understand it in real time. I think once you consistently do that over a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it doesn't actually matter what the text says anymore because you understand that it's more of a comprehension exercise than it is a substantive knowledge exercise. So that's what I usually recommend to students.
I think that's really solid. I think that the habit of reading long form is somewhat getting lost these days with spending so much time on digital devices. I feel like the content that we consume is being constructed in more of a short form style where it's like
Mhm.
newsletters with a little paragraph by paragraph of separate topics versus, say, a reading comp passage with even 450 words on a dedicated topic that's written at a college level. I think
Mhm.
most of what we read is probably written at like a fifth grade reading level. To be frank, if you look at like the Flish Kincaid scale, for example, of reading difficulty. And so
Mhm.
getting into the habit of reading harder text would be valuable. I mean, you're in law school. I mean, how does what you read in law school compare to what you're seeing online?
That's a great question. I think that There's definitely a lot of debate over, whether legal language, or they call it legally, is accessible or not to the average person. But I do think that it's different in the sense that you do need to be very precise. And that means that if you just look at a sentence pulled from any legal book or judgment, there's going to be a lot of like modifiers and adjectives and adverbs that are bigger than just the X did Y sentence structure. And that's because in law, you need to be so precise. You can't just say, a man went to the store. You need to identify the man, their features. You have to identify the store. And so you end up having these really long and convoluted sentences that are actually really reminiscent of the LSAT, actually. So I think the LSAT is great prep. But like you said, in today's era, there's just not much opportunity for us to actually be exposed to reading that type of sentence structure. And I think that's ultimately one of the biggest problems as to why students have such a hard time in RC.
No, I think it's probably just the path of least resistance. I mean, the second that you hit a difficult wall, it's like, well, I'll click over to something that's easier to consume and more enjoyable, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in law school, you don't have that option, right? This is the assigned case. You have no choice but to read it. And when you talk about the modifiers and qualifiers and the convoluted sentence structures that lead to massive run-ons with 4 commas in a single sentence, that's like what you see on the LSAT. That's the task before you that you have no choice but to tackle, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well said. Thank you for that. We've got a question here from Jacob asking, hey guys, when do you stop drilling by question type? I'm at a point where only the highest level difficulty questions trip me up. Is this a sign to move on? Where should I go from here? So when would you recommend a student move on from drilling by type in order to the next stage, let's say?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think Jacob here has highlighted a really important fact, right? Which is that he's at a point where he's only getting the highest level of questions wrong, right? And I think at that point, that's actually a really good indicator that maybe for Jacob or any student in the similar situation, they're not really bogged down by not understanding what an assumption is anymore. I think for most students in that scenario, they do. So I think it's a matter of understanding that, yeah, you probably want to just drill questions from 17 to 25 moving forward very slowly. And like we talked about earlier, figuring out all those little breadcrumbs, those little clauses, modifiers, etc., that you're not really seeing the first time around. And I want to say that for a lot of the highest difficulty level questions, that's really what it hinges on, or is those little words, phrases, and assumptions that are still answerable using the general framework that we teach to students. It's just that the gap or the assumption is a lot more subtle.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Jacob's at a point where he's not getting questions wrong because he doesn't know the question type or the proper perspective from which to view that type. He's just getting them wrong because they're hard. And like you said, the ways that LSAC levels up difficulty, the way that legal texts level up difficulty with all the convoluted sentence structures and the modifiers and qualifiers, he's got to look at which ones are most likely to trip him up personally through that review process using a framework like the Socratic review method. And if he can learn how to navigate more complex text, whether it's the complexity of the argument or tricks and traps in the choices, that's where he should focus. But if he's already at the point where he's at, say, 80%, 90% accuracy, that's probably the move.
Exactly.
And that usually happens for students who are already, say, in the 160s. So that's where they got to, or 160, 165. It's time to move on from there. Now, we've got a question here over on Instagram from Wasabi Sauce saying, hi, Steve and Mark. If I chose to write the LSAT in January instead of November, would my score allow me to qualify for the fall 2026 year? So I could speak from the US perspective saying that January is not too late, but I know that you're in Canada and things are different there in terms of the cycle, right? Could you speak to the Canadian admissions?
Yeah, for sure. I actually think it's the same way as you said. The January administration is far from being late for
Really?
the
I
admissions.
thought that some law schools in Canada, the deadlines are earlier. Is that not the case in your experience?
Yeah, I'd say the actual application deadline is earlier. Maybe some of them are October or November, but for the most part, all of them do take the January LSAT. But
Okay.
not as far as the February though, as I know some law schools in the US do.
So February might be too late for some of the schools in Canada, but otherwise they're probably good for January.
Exactly.
Nice, cool, awesome. That's really good to know. Now, in terms of Canadian schools, I mean, you want to share a bit about where you are in law school and your experience with admissions in Canada, and if you feel about Canada versus the US.
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of where I'm at law school right now, I'm at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. So I'm on the West Coast right now. Um, it's been really fun. I've been going through, I just finished my first year last year, so I'm currently in my second year of law school. And it's at a point where we actually get to kind of choose our specializations and what type of law we want to do. And I think for a lot of students, it's really hard to actually figure out what type of law you do want to do because it's so broad. And so for me personally, I'm at a point where I do like criminal law a lot, and I think that's my area of interest.
Well, that's awesome. Have you gotten to do any clinics or real world exposure in the field of climate law?
Yeah, I have. So I was volunteering for a pro bono legal clinic last year where you kind of do more community work. So you help people with minor criminal charges, you help them with tenancy issues, employment issues. And for this year, I'm very happy to be working with the Innocence Project. And so the Innocence Project is essentially this program where it's a pro bono legal clinic, but you're specifically helping incarcerated individuals who have been convicted of sexual assault or murder, and they claim that they're factually innocent. So this is definitely a bigger project for me to work on this year, and I'm just very excited to be able to use my legal skills to help people in need.
That's amazing. That's great without getting involved in that. And they're one of our most popular especially students love listening to people like that. And you also teach them with everything.
I think your mic might be cutting off a little bit, Steve, there.
Am I not coming through it now?
It's a little bit muddled there.
Okay, am I back now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, fantastic. So I was just thank you for calling that out. If I was on solo, I wouldn't have known that unless someone commented. I was just saying that you're one of our most popular coaches over at LSAT Unplugged. The students love working with you one-on-one, and you also teach one of the weekly small group sessions as well, right?
I did. I taught the RC workshop every Wednesday, but unfortunately this year with my schedule, I had to move on from that. But I love teaching the group classes. I love working with students, and if my availability ever opens up in the future, I'd love to continue teaching the
I
small
hope you
group.
can come back for that. In the meantime, folks have to get you for the one-on-one. But Mark, I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time from your busy law school schedule. I know you got to run, but I really appreciate you joining the live stream today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve. Happy to be here.
Of course. Have a good one, Mark. Take care.
You too. Bye now.
Bye. Well, I'll stay on for a few more minutes in case folks have more questions. I'm happy to stick around. If you're on Instagram, you can drop a comment. If you're on the YouTube live stream, you're welcome to leave a comment here as well. I'll stay on around for a few more minutes if I can, if anyone has follow-up questions. I'm really glad Mark was able to join us for the stream today. And by the way, folks, if you want to get more support on your personal situation, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons for as many folks as I possibly can. You can book a free call at unpluggedprep.com/start. And I'm happy to help out. You could book a session and we could talk through your situation personally as well. I'm also running a free multi-hour LSAT marathon live stream this Wednesday in honor of the September LSAT score release. Scores are released at 9 a.m. I will be on at 8:30 a.m. to help out folks. We're going to have a lot of special guests. We're going to be welcoming law school admission officers, former and current, from top 14 law schools like UCLA. We've also got, what else? We have UChicago. We also have, UVA as well. So 3 law school admission officers, former and current, from UVA, UCLA, and UChicago will be joining the live stream. Again, that is on Wednesday in honor of September LSAT score release. Scores come out at 9 a.m. I will be on at 8:30 a.m. to start with, and we'll be on all day. We also have a lot more LSAT coaches. We had Mark on today. We'll have some more LSAT coaches on Wednesday as well. I'll also be doing open Q&A with many students as well to talk them through their LSAT situations. If your LSAT score is released Wednesday and you want guidance on next steps, you can join the live stream. I already have it posted on the YouTube channel under the live tab if you want to click the notification bell to be notified when the live stream starts. We'll be helping out as many folks as we can, talking them through their LSAT situations and next steps. Of course, we've got a lot of folks, October LSAT, the November LSAT, January, and beyond. And so if you want guidance on your personal situation, the live stream will be a great way to get feedback on your situation there. But of course, I'm here to help you out as well now. if you have questions and challenges that you're facing. We have a question here from Michael. And by the way, folks, when you drop your question, please let me know your current score, your goal score, and when you're taking the LSAT. If you know, that context is really helpful to allow me to better guide you and give you more tailored feedback. So Michael's saying, I review my wrong answers, but I don't feel like I'm learning enough from them. How exactly should I be reviewing to make sure I don't repeat the same mistakes? Current score 163, goal 173. So you're looking for a 10-point increase. I'm taking it in February. So when you review a question, ideally, I recommend that you have a Google Sheet with separate columns to give you a particular framework. In other words, you want to look at the stimulus or the passage and reading comp. You want to look at the question stem, and you also want to look at the tempting wrong answer that you picked and the right answer and whatever made it unappealing so that you didn't pick it. So for the stimulus or the passage, you want to look at what might have led you the wrong direction as far as the content of the text there. So was it in logical reasoning, for example, was that the conclusion was buried in the middle? Was that they failed to include a key indicator word for either the conclusion or the evidence? Did they include annoying or difficult words like unless, except, until, or without? In reading comprehension, did you have difficulty identifying the thesis statement or the main idea, the central point, the author's opinion? If it was the question stem, was it attempting, for the question stem, maybe LSAC referred to the question type in an unfamiliar way, or maybe you never got clarity on that particular question type. If it was the answer choices, was it attempting wrong answer? What made it tempting? What made it wrong? If it was the right answer that discouraged you, what made it unappealing and what ultimately made it correct? Because you have these traps of encouragement towards the wrong answer and traps of discouragement away from the right answer. And until you can drill down to exactly what you're getting wrong and why, you may just end up making the same mistake again. And the benefit of a Google Sheet is that your review process becomes templated and consistent, meaning that you will always know that you're not going to miss an opportunity to drill down to the specific area that gave you trouble. If you're keeping your review log in, say, a notebook, a physical notebook, you might not be as consistent in looking at those specific areas. So I recommend that during your review, use a Google Sheet or at least a Google Doc where you can copy paste a framework to make sure that you're always going to walk through those particular elements of the question. Because every question that you get wrong or have difficulty with is an opportunity to learn something new. But if you don't take advantage of that opportunity by reviewing, you may just end up making the same mistakes again. So my recommendation is that when you are at a 163 looking for 173 as you are, Michael, that the review is now your biggest opportunity because you've already got a good sense of the basics, meaning that you're not getting a question wrong because of the question stem type, meaning that you know how to identify and approach a strengthened question or a weakened question or even parallel, for example. And this is why I created the Socratic review method framework. We use it live in coaching. We also guide you on how to use it in your own self-study process. And in our one-on-one coaching sessions, we can guide you through it live so that it actually sticks and the same mistakes don't keep showing up. And so if you'd like my support on walking through that process, you can book a free one-on-one private LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start, and we can walk through it together. And by the way, folks, who are just joining now, this is an open LSAT Q&A, anything at all, LSAT and law school admissions. You can drop your questions in the chat on either YouTube or Instagram, and I'll walk you through your situation live here while you're on. Happy to share anything at all that I can. When you leave your question, please drop your current score if you have one, if you've taken a practice test, your goal score, if you have one, and then what your target LSAT test date is. That context is really helpful to allow me to better guide you and give you feedback on your situation. We have one here from Marcus. I work full-time and have only 2 hours per day to study. How can I structure my time so I can still hit my target? I'm currently around a 161. aiming for 170 in January. Okay, so 2 hours a day, working full time, hoping maybe can you do more on weekends? Because that's the biggest opportunity to increase your study duration significantly, right? Because 2 hours a day works out to only 10 days a week for the 5 days of the week, but then some students can do another 5 on Saturday, another 5 on Sunday. That would double your studying from 10 to 20. So my first thought is I'm encouraging you to just go hard, to give yourself a lot more time, get really serious and all in on this is what I'm saying here, right? 20 hours a week for 3 months is a lot. 10 hours a week for 3 months, not nearly as much. And the thing is that it's a lot easier to go from a 141 to a 150 than to go from a 161 to a 170. Now, my other thought is if I can help you carve out even more time to go from 20 a week to even 25. So 2 hours a day, that is only, say, you work full time, get home at 6, studying from, say, 7 to 9, 4 or 5 days a week. I'm just speculating here, but that's pretty standard from what I've seen from students. If you could carve out even another half hour during lunch and another half hour in the morning, you would add on another 50% to your study time over the course of the week, going from 2 hours a day to 3 hours a day. And the reason I'm getting so tactical here and specific is because all of these gains that you make in your study time will compound over time. So if I can get you from 10 hours on weekdays to 20 hours by including weekends to 25 hours by giving you an additional hour on your weekdays, we've now tripled your studying from 10 hours to 30 hours a week. And the LSAT is important enough that it's worth giving yourself those additional 20 hours to go from 10 to 30 because you're aiming for a top 4% LSAT score. A 170 puts you in the 96th percentile, meaning that you're in the top 4% of all test takers. 161 is a lot lower, and 170 will open up a lot more doors than a 161 will. So I want to give you every single opportunity to level up your prep. Then there's the question of what you do with these now 30 hours that you have. Now, at a 161, there may be some specific weak areas that you want to target in your prep. Maybe there are certain specific types of questions, say in logical reasoning. There are roughly 15 different types of questions in logical reasoning. The biggest ones are necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. Those are the 3 most common types of logical reasoning questions. Beyond those, you also have strengthen, weaken, flaw, necessary assumption, sufficient assumption, and so on. But the 3 most common types, necessary assumption, inference, flaw, I would recommend that you start there because those are the highest leverage areas. Then there's reading comprehension as well in terms of your general approach to reading comp. In the earlier phases of your prep, you want to drill questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. Beyond that, you also want to look at the method of reasoning in the stimulus. And once you've gotten to a point where you're no longer getting questions wrong because of the type, you also want to look at your pacing and your endurance. Pacing, doing individual questions by type, pacing, doing individual sections to work on how you allocate time over the course of the section, and then endurance, doing full-length timed practice tests to build up your stamina. You ideally want to get at least 10 of those under your belt before test day, so that test day itself will be like just another run through. So I'm curious if you could share, Marcus, like, are you at a stage where you're still drilling by type, or are you at a place now where you're doing more timed work? And do you feel like timed work is really where you need to focus at this stage? Because we build study plans for our students using the LASER approach as an overall framework. LASER is an acronym standing for learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. Learning is building the foundation. I think you're past that stage, probably, meaning that you already have a general sense of the different sections and the different question types. A is drilling questions to better understand the proper perspective from which to approach them. S is for sections to work on pacing. E is for exams and endurance, and R is for review. Okay, so you're saying you've already been through a course. All right, so if you've already been through a course, then hopefully that course has given you that foundation and you don't need that anymore. Now what you've got to do is you've got to work on probably sections. And if you've been doing this for, say, a month or two at least, you've probably already gotten enough theory where you just need more exposure. A lot of students will fall into the trap of only having done theory, and they watch video after video after video, but they don't get game day style exposure, which really makes a massive difference. If you can start doing timed work sooner rather than later, you give yourself more of a runway to get more exams under your belt. I recommend at least minimum 10 exams under your belt, so that when you get to test day, you've done it all before, you've seen it all before, there's not really anything new to be working on, because there's nothing new to be exposed to. Like if you have a bad proctor or a tech issue, you're going to be able to maintain some consistency in your performance because it just is noise to you, but it's not disruptive noise, because you can put your head down, buckle down, and focus, and just continue and pick up where you left off if there is some sort of interruption because the proctor chats you in the middle or asks you to show your webcam around the room or something. Like, hey, I'm in the middle of a timed section here. And by the way, if you want to mitigate the likelihood or reduce the likelihood of that happening, all you've got to do is just let them know at the start, hey, if you've got to interrupt me for any reason, can you please just pause the clock? You'd be amazed at how effective that can be. It's not foolproof, of course, but it can and will have a significant impact in reducing the likelihood of that sort of thing occur. And if you could do 15 exams or 20 exams before test day, even better. I mean, if you've got 3.5 months till January, that works out to roughly, 14 to 15 weeks. If you did just one exam a week, you could get 15 under your belt. And if you're lucky enough to have a flexible schedule, if your boss is understanding, I know you said you're working full time, but if you can leave work a bit early on Wednesday, let's say, maybe you could carve out another exam that day in the afternoon. And if you can't do that, that's okay. I mean, you could still do individual sections over the course of the week. That would still be some pacing practice. That would be better than not doing it. But you also want to make sure that you're reviewing your mistakes in depth, right? Because if you're not reviewing them, you're not learning from them, then you'll just make the same mistakes again. And you've got a limited number of practice tests. There are 58 of them on Law Hub, numbered 101 to 158. More recent is more relevant, so you don't want to burn through all the new ones without adequate review of them. If you only have time to do individual sections, I would probably do, say, some of your older exams for that purpose specifically. So you do the exams in the 130s as individual sections. You do 140s and 150s as timed exams. And if your test date is farther out, for those of you watching who are taking this in maybe February or April or June, then you start farther back. And so when we built a study plan for our students, what we do is we basically say, okay, well, we want you taking exam, the newest exam, which is currently 158, the week prior to the test. Then you work backwards. If, say, you're taking the exam in early June, you do 158 the couple days prior. You do 157 in June 1st or late May. You do 156 in the third week of May. You do 155 in the second week of May. You just work backwards on the calendar if your cadence or frequency was one exam a week. If you're doing 2 a week, then you just adjust accordingly. But we work backwards to the point that maybe now you're doing exam 120 if you're taking it in June. If you're taking it in January, you're doing exam 140 now. In other words, you don't want to do the older ones at the expense of the newer ones and never even get to the newer ones. And by the way, folks who are joining now, just drop your questions in the chat, anything at all. LSAT and law school admissions, the floor is open. I'm happy to talk through your situation and give you feedback wherever you're at. Is this helpful, Marcus? Is this all making sense? I mean, the reason we create study plans for students is exactly for situations like this, where we want to make sure that every single minute of your limited time will actually move the needle. Okay, yeah, no, I'm glad it's helping. My thought is just to help you maximize what you've got, right? Because you're not in a rush, you have the time. We just got to give you the guidance to get you there. And by the way, you have the holidays coming up. For some folks, the holidays, I'm talking here, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, for some folks, that is going to reduce your available study time. For others, it's a great excuse to disengage yourself from family obligations and work obligations and just study more. Well, every situation is unique, but my thought is let's make the most of the time that you have. And for those of you who are in school and you have the liberty and the availability to study for the LSAT full-time over winter break, January is a great target test date for just that reason, where you maybe have limited time during the semester. You're going to have midterms coming up soon. You're going to have finals coming up towards the end of the semester. And I don't want you to stress trying to balance LSAT with those academic obligations. But winter break gives you a reset where you can do nothing but LSAT for maybe 3 weeks or so. And then you take the LSAT in early January, you knock it out, get it out of the way. And you have those last 2 weeks prior to that exam date to just go hardcore on the LSAT, where you do 2 exams a week, review in depth. You join every single live session that we offer. You book all the coaching sessions as well. You go hard on it. You just get really, really all out about this, right? Because the LSAT weighs more heavily than your entire undergraduate GPA combined. And so the fact that your final exams or midterms in one single semester could derail your prep is a real shame. I mean, I think it's understandable that your academics would appear to take priority when your test date is so soon. But when those obligations are so soon, I mean. But because the LSAT's coming up pretty shortly as well, it would make sense if you could to de-emphasize or deprioritize school just a little bit for now to focus on the LSAT. And if that means that maybe if you're taking it in October coming up and your midterms are after it, focus on LSAT now. And then catch up on the semester's obligations after the LSAT. Or maybe you say to yourself, you know what, I'm just going to go for January instead, because then I have all of winter break to devote to this. You know your situation, you know you can make the best decision for yourself, but I'm just giving you some context here to think about from a law school admissions perspective, that one semester's worth of grades will be a lot less significant than the LSAT. So give the LSAT due weight, is what I'm saying. That's really my point here. Don't tell your professors I said this because they're not going to agree, but I'm just looking at this solely from a law school admissions perspective. And by the way, to get even more real about this, grade inflation's real. So choose your classes carefully. I mean, the T14 GPA medians are all 3.8 and 3.9. You can see this for yourself in the ABA 509 reports. You can see it on the US News website. If you just Google Harvard Law ABA 509 or Yale Law ABA 509, the medians are all 3.8 and 3.9. And the LSAT medians are all 170 to 174. And so if your GPA median is below a 3.8, you want your LSAT median to at least be above a 173, 174 to balance it out. And I made the mistake in undergrad of taking an intro economics class because I was curious. I wanted to learn about economics. I had never studied it before. But I didn't realize that intro econ, like most intro classes, are in anything that's not purely humanities, like English or political science, which was my major, political science. They're weeder classes. They aim to weed people out, and they're curved pretty brutally. And so I got, I think it was a B in economics, which drags down my GPA significantly because all my grades in poli-sci and humanities were all like in the A range. And that was my punishment for taking a class outside my area of expertise or context. And so you get punished for getting curious and going beyond your comfort zone. And from a law school admissions perspective, they just want the number. They don't care what the major was. And so if you're a STEM major, if you're majoring in engineering and your GPA is a 3.3, that might not be bad in engineering, but in humanities, it's frankly just objectively terrible compared to others because of GPA inflation. And so if your GPA is below median and you're still an undergrad, I hate to say it, but take classes that are going to give you higher grades. I took a grad level, I think it was philosophy class, and I got an A because, well, I don't know exactly why I got the A, but I can say that the professor didn't believe in grades and gave everybody an A. So I don't know that I truly deserved that A. Maybe I did, but maybe not. But I got an A on my transcript because of that class, because he didn't believe in grades. And that was great from a law school admissions perspective. Now, the effort in getting that A was a lot less than the effort I took to work my butt off and get a B in economics. So my lesson learned was don't take econ again, take more classes with a professor who doesn't believe in grades. So be ruthless. If your sole goal is to get into the best law school possible, you want to get take classes where you can get a top GPA. And if you're at a point where you're not already, if you're done with if you're done with undergrad and you're not able to impact your undergraduate GPA any longer, you're going to want to switch gears and focus on your LSAT, because that's going to be the biggest needle. That's going to be the biggest needle mover for you at this stage, is just to get the highest LSAT score you can to counteract whatever your GPA is. For folks just joining now, this is an open floor, anything at all, LSAT and law school admissions. For those who just joined and weren't aware, we're doing a multi-hour, all-day live stream on Wednesday in honor of the September LSAT score release. You can click the notification bell on YouTube under the live tab on my channel. We're going to be inviting in special guests from T14 law schools, including UCLA, UChicago, and UVA. We're also going to have some more LSAT coaches on. We had Mark, who's one of our most popular coaches in the LSAT Unplugged program. He came on a little bit earlier. We're going to have several more coaches on as well. We're also going to be doing an open Q&A coaching with several students live as well. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there. We've got a question here from Rosie on Instagram asking, is it possible to improve from 150 to 155 within only a month? Yeah, sure it is. I mean, are you taking it in October or November though? Because we're kind of midway between the two test dates. Rosie, are we taking it in October about 2 weeks from now, or about a month and a half from now in November? But yeah, 150 to 155, that's not a huge increase. And it's a lot easier to make that 5-point increase than to go from, say, 170 to 175. And what are your weak areas, Rosie? What are your particular challenges or pain points that you're experiencing right now? I mean, broadly speaking, I would think that the biggest opportunities are going to be either in your approach to reading comp overall, because if you change your reading comprehension, note-taking, or highlighting, or question order approach, that's going to impact the entire section. You've got 27, 28 questions across 4 passages, and so you could, if you change your approach to the passage, that's going to level up your performance across all 4 passages. And then in logical reasoning, the 3 most common types are necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. So I would look to see what can you improve in those 3 areas, because they're highest leverage, highest yield. You're going to improve more from leveling up your understanding on those question types than on, say, parallel or evaluate the argument, that are a lot less common, right? I mean, there's only maybe 2 parallels per section, maybe 3. But necessary assumption, there's going to be probably 5 of those per section, maybe more. So I would recommend, without more context, I'd say focus on those specific areas. But I also want to know, like, do you have a study plan that's going to account for taking practice tests? Because the other thing is that we can't only focus on accuracy. Like I talked about the laser approach, right? Learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. When we create personalized study plans for our students inside the program. And by the way, if you're looking for more guidance on your study plan, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. A link is in my bio on Instagram and in the description below the YouTube video. And I could talk you through your situation more there in a more private one-on-one context. I want to help out as many folks as I possibly can. And so this is an open offer to everyone out there watching this live right now. Feel free to book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me, and I'll talk through your situation personally. My other thought is I'd be curious to know if someone wants to improve from a 150 to a 155, Rosie. I mean, what have you done so far? Have you taken any courses? Have you gotten any coaching? Because when we add support into the mix, when you've never had support before, there's generally going to be a lot of low-hanging fruit, because when you're studying on your own, you just don't know what you don't know. And so adding some expert guidance into the mix in some capacity is going to make your path forward that much smoother, because maybe you're not reviewing in sufficient depth. Maybe you're under misconception regarding a particular question type. I mean, I was talking with a student the other day in one of these free LSAT tutoring lessons, and he said to me, I'm having trouble with assumption questions. And I was like, assumption questions? There is no such thing as an assumption question. I didn't say it like that, though, by the way. But you've got necessary assumption questions and sufficient assumption questions, and they're asking for very different things. And if you think that they're just the same thing, you might get both types wrong. Terrible place to be, by the way, especially only a few weeks or a month before your exam. Ideally, you would have addressed that earlier in the process during the foundational phase of learning, stage 1. But we are where we are. It's okay. We could pick up the pieces from here and course correct for the future. And so if we can get you one of those quick wins in the final month, just with one free LSAT tutoring lesson, it's well worth taking that opportunity to do so, right? And imagine if we got you consistent support to tackle several misconceptions like that. Maybe you can improve in all areas, or at least the 3 big ones in logical reasoning, necessary assumption, inference, and flaw, and then reading comprehension as well. That's 4 different places we can improve. And if each of those improvements got you a 2-point increase, that would be an 8-point increase across those 4 different areas, bringing you from a 150 to a 158. Pretty good, right? I mean, I recommend that we get you ideally to a 160 if you want a 155, because the thing is that the typical student drops 5 to 8 points from their practice to their actual. And so we want to have a buffer in case you have a bad proctor or you have a tech issue. We want you getting a 155 on your worst day and hopefully doing better, assuming that everything goes smoothly. And there is still a time to improve in just 2 weeks before October, or a month and a half before November. But we've got to look under the hood and see what's going on. And so we'll talk through this more when you book a call with me. We'll talk through your situation, find you the highest leverage areas to focus on. Unpluggedprep.com/start. Book a call with me. Again, link in bio on Instagram, link in the description on YouTube. Thank you all for watching. I hope you found this helpful. And again, please join. We've got the free live stream coming up on Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I'll be on all day addressing your questions on LSAT law school admissions. We'll have special guests from T14 law schools, UCLA, UChicago, and UVA. Feel free to join live if you want my support. I'll be happy to help you out. And thanks all for watching. Wish you all the best. Take care.